Matthew 25. This is one of those occasions in Matthew 25 where we're not too disappointed with the chapter divisions that are in our current modern text, but we will note they are artificial and were added later, and there's nothing about the things in Matthew 25 that will be any different than or any change of subject from Matthew 24. So Matthew 24 and Matthew 25 are part of the same discourse. And so we don't mind them dividing that into two chapters, because when you get into chapters with 80 and 90 verses, it gets a bit unwieldy. And so chapter 25 has some stories and applications, some parables that relate to the judgments that were given and pronounced in Matthew 24. Matthew 25 is a continuation of the thoughts of Matthew 24. It is some parables and a story that Jesus tells that explain the necessity of what he ended chapter 24 with. And so Matthew 24 ended with this, Matthew 24:44. For this reason, you must also be ready. And so the last part of Matthew 24 and all of Matthew 25 is going to be further explanation of that thought of Matthew 24:44, that you must be ready. For the Son of Man is coming at an hour that you do not know, or that you do not think he will. And so then he tells, and we studied last week, about the faithful and sensible or wise slave who his master put in charge of his household to give them their food at the proper time. Blessed is that slave whom the master finds so doing when he comes. All of the things that follow here in Matthew 24, or the three sections of Matthew 25, are going to be this again, same idea. The blessedness of the slave whom his master finds so doing when he comes. Truly, I say to you, he will put him in charge of all his possessions. But even if that evil slave says in his heart, my master is not coming for a long time, and begins to beat his fellow slaves, and eat and drink with the drunkards, and the master of that slave will come on a day when he doesn't expect him, at an hour at which he doesn't know. And he will cut him to pieces, and assign him a place with the hypocrites. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So the parable, or the story we know at the end of Matthew 25 of the sheep and the goats. What's that a story about? It's the long version of that. And so Matthew 25 is going to be just, further explanation, further ways of illustration of these points that we studied at the end of Matthew 24. And so in Matthew 25 now, as you'll see on your screen, we have these parables and a story of readiness and reward. Readiness and reward. We'll have this in three parts. Tonight, the first part that we'll study, verses 1 through 13, the parable of the 10 virgins, sometimes told as the parable of the 5 wise and 5 foolish virgins. So we got the 10 virgins, and it's a story of readiness and preparation, or not. Then the parable of the talents. And so that's about faithful working with the blessings that he's given you. And so he gives those slaves of his each some talents, 5 talents, 2 talents, or 1 talent. And just a little bit of homework assignment for next week. Find out what a talent is. Because sometimes we talk about the 1 talent man. And, I think we misuse that topic and we misuse the context. If we talk about a 1 talent man as if he doesn't have much. Find out what a talent is, and we'll see just how much that fella had. But that's your homework assignment for next week. Find out what a talent is, and find out what an utter blessing it was to be given 1, much less 5 or 2. So that's a parable about faithful work with the blessings which God has given in the parables and the story of the judgment. There's equal weight, there's equal time, equal emphasis given to both those who are prepared and those who are unprepared. It's not more about one or the other. It's pretty much equal time for those who are ready and those who are not. So let's move on then to the parable of the 10 virgins. Again, a parable about readiness and preparation of being prepared. Now, I do want to say, in a moment we're going to read the whole parable, then we're going to go back and give comments. I do want to say that one thing we'd never want to do with a parable is we never want to overpress. We never want to find in the details more than the main thing that the parable is telling. Parables are generally telling a truth or two, other than maybe the parable of the sower, where there's literally 6 or 7 different things that are all of significant meaning. And the reason we know that they are of significant meaning is that Jesus tells us. When it comes to just about any parable except for the parable of the sower, including the other ones that Jesus explains, most of the time it's really just a couple of key points, a couple of key truths, or maybe just one truth that the parable wants to make the point of. And so we never want to overpress in the details of parables, and we're going to take our own advice and our own medicine, and we're going to try that tonight, to not press too much on any particular details. Now, one thing that will make that happen, but one thing that happens with that, and I almost hate to say this because I know what happens every time I say it, it almost means that tonight's lesson won't be as long as the other ones. Now, hopefully you can endure that, and it won't be a great disappointment to you. But like the parable of the mustard seed, kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in a field. And it is smaller than the other seeds. And when it's full grown, it's larger than the garden plants and becomes a tree. And the birds of the air come and nest in its branches. Well, the point there is of size. The kingdom goes from tiny to substantial, from something you'd hardly notice at all to something you can't miss, to something that would seem so frail at the beginning, but ends up being a real substantial shelter in which we can rest. And that's the parable of the mustard seed. And if we started trying to explain what the other garden plants were and what they represented, if we tried to start talking about what the birds meant and what the nest meant and what the branches meant, we might go off for a long time. But that's really not the point of the parable, but it does help fill the time. But because we're dealing with a parable, we'll take, again, our own medicine and not try to just have more and more stuff to add for no reason. And that's why I have time to read another parable, because the main point of this parable, I think, is pretty obvious. All right, so here's our parable. Remember, Jesus had said in Matthew 24 that one to be taken, another left. And here we have 5 that are taken and 5 that are left. And but it would have been hard to tell when these ladies first went out there to the place where they were waiting for the bridegroom. It would have been hard to tell and know just by looking which one's going to be in and which one's going to be out. We would have maybe thought when we saw the 10 of them waiting there, at midday or early afternoon, we think, well, there's 10 of them. They're about to enjoy a great feast. It turns out 5 of them miss it. And I don't think we would have known by looking. We might have been able to interview them if we had, the foresight, and if we knew what was going to be the problem, we might have been able to tell, but probably not. And also, if some guy goes up to 10 girls and starts asking questions, what's the response going to be? Get out of here, you creepo. So you wouldn't know. You just wouldn't know. You'd think they're all getting in, but they're not. So here's the parable. Verse 1 to verse 13. Then the kingdom of heaven will be compared to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 were prudent. And when the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them. But the prudent took oil in flask along with their lamps. Now when the bridegroom was delaying, they got drowsy and began to sleep. But at midnight there was a shout, "Behold, the bridegroom! Come out to meet him." Then all those virgins rose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said to the prudent, give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out. But the prudent answered, no, then there will not be enough for us and you too. Go instead to the dealer and buy some for yourselves. And while they were away to make the purchase, the bridegroom came. And those who were ready went in with him to the wedding feast, and the door was shut. Later the other virgins came also, saying, Lord, Lord, open up to us. But he answered, truly I say to you, I do not know you. Be on the alert then, for you do not know the day nor the hour. Well, we think about that and how it ends rather sadly for those five. We should also think about the five who are enjoying the bridegroom and his festivities and enjoying the party inside the security of those doors that those others are going to never make it through. And so, today we have, when we do weddings and the like, we have wedding planners to make sure everything is planned down to the minute. It's going to be at this time, this movement's going to happen. At this time, the bride's going to come. At this time, the groom's going to come. At this time, we're going to move the reception. At the reception, at this hour, we're going to have this toast, and we're going to have this speaker. And then they're going to retire to their rooms to get dressed into their traveling clothes at this hour. And at this time, they're going to go. And we got all these things set up. And sometimes they run down to the minute. I remember one time, not that long ago, I was at a civil ceremony, and the couple had rented a wedding chapel, and they told everybody be at the wedding chapel at this exact time, and they had a 20-minute space in the wedding chapel. The wedding chapel was set to move 3 couples an hour through, and so they had the 1:20 reservation, the 1:20 to 1:40. Turns out they didn't have quite so much business on that midweek afternoon. And the nice fellow who ran the wedding chapel was kind enough to give them an extra 10 minutes. That's not how the Middle East operated. And that's not how most people operate. Most people operate on a much looser schedule than that, and especially in the ancient world where the bridegroom, the groom went to go get his bride, and there might be all kind of festivities at her house and with her family, and the trip back to his house, and then to the festivities with his friends and family and all of that might have got delayed. Well, this got greatly delayed. So these young women, they were wanting to go to that, and they're somewhat prepared. They have on their wedding clothes. It's not like that other parable where a fellow shows up without his wedding clothes. They seem to be prepared in that way, and they got their lamps. But he gets delayed. And so the foolish, it says, took no oil. They were there for a short time. They were there. Had everything gone just as they expected, they would have been great. They would have been fine. And I think in a Christian life that occurs sometimes. If the Christian life had gone just as we expected it, why, we would have been prepared just for that. Because why? That's what we expected. But when it didn't turn out as we expected, when it was a little bit longer, a little bit harder, a little bit rockier, a little bit more difficult, then, there's some, they're not ready for that. And so they get caught short, and so they hadn't made their preparations. So the prudent had made their preparations. They took their oil with their lamps. The bridegroom got there eventually. It was a long time. It was such a long time that they all got drowsy. Again, it's not just the wise and the foolish. It's not the foolish got drowsy and the wise didn't. The wise got drowsy too. Again, this was a great delay, because if the girls are expecting to go to a wedding party, and there's 10 of them there to all chat with each other, to keep each other's spirits up, to do whatever girls do to pass the time, the late afternoon and the early evening and half the night. Well, they would have kept each other awake, wouldn't they? But this is a great delay. It's a delay enough that even the prepared ones are starting to get sleepy. And so those long goodbyes at the other place cost them. Finally, the bridegroom comes. They know he's coming. They can hear him coming. There's probably not that much in those ancient cities moving around in the middle of the night. Again, the land of no streetlights, the land of no policemen. You don't move around in the middle of the night, do you? But they were doing so because of the joy of the occasion and probably have enough security because there's enough of his friends around. And so they can hear him coming. And so they arose and they trimmed their lamps. They get their lamps fired back up again, where they can give him a proper greeting, and they can see the way, and they can properly join in the festivities. And I'm not sure exactly why this groom wanted, again, this pressing the details of a parable. Why did this groom make it a requirement that everybody have a lamp? I don't know, but he did. And so they're not ready. And so they say to the wise, they say, give us some of your oil. Our lamps are going out. The foolish, as is often the case in this world, the foolish ask the wise to bail them out. The foolish always ask the wise to bail them out. And let me ask you, in your life, and this might tell you something about how your life is going and how you've lived your life and how you might want to think about the kind of life you've led and the kind of things that you're involved in and that you have done. Are you a person that other people ask to help them out? Or are you a person that goes to others and say, hey, could you help a friend? Which one are you? Most of us are going to be one or the other. And somebody says, well, I don't ever ask anybody, and nobody asks me either. I'm self-sufficient. Well, how are you so disconnected from people around you that no one wants to ask you something? So to the wise, I know, and I don't want to sound braggadocious in this because I have been asked in my life to help people. And isn't it something of a privilege to be asked? Isn't it something a little bit flattering to be asked? Aren't you glad they're asking you? Now, I know sometimes they'll roid you out and they'll trouble you. And some folks you have to cut off. You can't enable their error. You can't enable their foolishness. That you can't do that. But you should, to the great degree that you're able, you should help a brother out. But most of us are going to be one or the other. And think about that. Are you more often the asker, or are you more often the helper? But we recognize, as in this passage, there's limits as to how much we can do for one another. There really are limits. And so sometimes the only one who can help is God. And so there are things which I can't help a person. They have to ask God. There are things that might be beyond my resources. They might have to ask somebody else and the like. But there are limits to what we can do. And we should help as much as we can. So these folks are asking, but the others here are unable to help. So verse 9, but the prudent answered, saying, no, there'll not be enough for us and you too. There won't be enough for us and you too. Again, in helping, we help as we can. But there are times when we cannot help anymore. We've helped to the limit of our resources. We've helped to the limit of and again, those resources might be time, it might be emotional energy. Actually, it might be money, it might be resources we can give them and the like. So it could be mental, it could be spiritual, it could be financial and physical. There's a limit to what we can do for each other. Again, to the degree we can help, we should help, but there is a limit to how much we can do. So no, there won't be enough for us and you. Go instead to the dealers and buy some for yourself. And so you think, well, in the ancient world, where would you go in the middle of the night? Omar's 24-hour oil shop? Did they have all-night convenience stores for a little bit of oil, a little bit of donkey food, a little, a little bit of oats and a loaf of bread, something for your donkey and something for you? The dealer, he's shut up for the night, right? And did these, I don't know, maybe they live in a town where they know who the dealer is. But imagine trying to find a dealer. Hey, who's the oil dealer around here? I don't know. He has market stall number 3 right there by the gate. Yeah, but where does he live? I don't know. It's the middle of the night. Go away. Imagine how long it must have taken, even if they knew where the guy lived, for him to get out of bed, open up his his jugs, go out, take some to these ladies out there on the porch. His wife going, why are you talking to these ladies in the middle of the night again? Because they want some oil. Mm-hmm, sure, honey. Okay. I sent them away. Don't worry. Coming back to bed. You just, in the ancient world, you don't get them. And so there's limits. And then at the last minute, it might be really hard to get what you need. Again, this is a parable about preparation. There are so many things that you really did have time for, to study to know, or money to save, or connections to make, or whatever it is that would have helped you through this trouble. If you look back in hindsight, there probably was time and opportunity for the knowledge and for the connections and for the resources that would help you through. But when you're pressed, when the bridegroom's coming down the street and he's headed for the gate, not far away, do you have time right then? You don't. And so they had to go and do it at an inopportune time for themselves. Now, I'm sure, kind of like Paul in the book of Romans, his heart's desire and prayer for his Jewish brethren was their salvation. And he said, I would that I could be accursed if it would save them. But he couldn't do that. And so I'm sure we have some of ours, our parents or grandparents or children or grandchildren or beloved neighbor or childhood friend or someone else. I'm sure there's somebody that we wish we could get prepared for, but we can't. We can't get prepared for them. We can only ask them to get prepared. We can plead with them to get prepared. We can show them the example of how to get prepared. We can study with them and guide them to help them get prepared. But when they don't see the need of preparation, or when they don't think they have the time, or they don't think it's worth the time, when they got something else they'd rather do with their time, it's difficult. And so, these 5 who got to go in, I'm sure they missed the 5 who couldn't. I'm sure they were their friends. They just spent the day with them. They were all gathered at the same place for a reason. They all thought they had the same relationship with this bridegroom, that they could be in part of that family. But they weren't. They weren't. And you didn't know until it actually happened who was ready and who wasn't. So while they were away, verse 10, making their purchase, the bridegroom came. And those who were ready went into him to the wedding feast. And the door was shut. Well, there was an opportunity to go in. And by foolishness, they missed it. Now, this is one of these plain passages of Scripture which teach against several ideas that people find attractive in religion. This passage, with 5 going in and 5 getting shut out, if nothing else, teaches us that there is no universal salvation. There is no universal salvation. Not everybody's getting into the feast. And universalism is a heresy that creeps up from time to time. It's becoming maybe a bit more popular in our day. And, you can almost hear the great sounding sermons from the universalist. The God I love and the God who loves me is too great to leave anyone out. Well, what about these 5? They got left out. And so that kind of thing is not gospel teaching. The idea that it's against grace or against love for some to make it and some to not, that's against what Jesus taught. Jesus was gracious. Here, this bridegroom is gracious. The bridegroom lets everybody who's ready to come to the feast come to the feast. Grace is inviting these ladies. Grace is letting in all the prepared. That is gracious. These ladies who were wise, what did they find? A free and a joyous and a jubilant entry. That's grace. But what about these other 5? They find by their own foolishness, they were not ready to receive the grace that was offered. And so one of the lessons here, and we'll see it all the more in these next two sections, is that there is no universal salvation. Another thing that we'll see is that there is no doctrines of second chances. They didn't open the door once to let in the main party, and then after a period of chastisement or a period of correction or a period of, additional efforts and reconciliations, they open the gate again. They opened the gate once in a gracious and loving way. They would have let in anybody who was ready. But any second chance doctrine is out. So, things like Mormon baptism for the dead and the like. No second chance doctrines in this text. Also, no salvation by good intentions. It's salvation by the wisdom to be ready, but not just by good intentions. These ladies had gone up there to meet him. These ladies had tried even up to the last minute, or maybe at the last minute they tried again, to get ready. These ladies, after the door was shut, are still trying to get in. These ladies, there's more about their intention to get in than the wise people's intention to get in, isn't there? The wise were just ready. These foolish, there's all this talk about what they did and how they tried to get ready when they hadn't been, because you didn't need that with the others. But there is no doctrine of salvation by good intentions alone. There's salvation by this gracious offer and invitation for those who are prepared. And so later, verse 11, these other virgins came up and they said, Lord, open up for us. Open up for us. And he said, truly I say to you, I do not know you. Be alert, on the alert then, for you do not know the day or the hour. Now, there's 3 verses. I just put them all up here. There's 3 verses that this ending reminds me of, where they say, Lord, do something else for us. Lord, open up for us. Lord, now we know better. Now we're ready. I'm reminded of the story of Lazarus and the rich man. It came about that the poor man died. This is Luke 16:22. He's carried away by the angels to Abraham's bosom. The rich man died and was buried. In Hades, he lifted up his eyes, being in torment, and he saw Abraham far away, and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried out and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus, that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool off my tongue, for I'm in agony in this flame. But Abraham said, Child, remember in this life you had many good things, and likewise Lazarus bad things. But now he's in comfort and you're in agony. And besides all this, there's a great gulf fixed, in order that those who would wish to come from over here may not be able, and none may be able to cross from there to us. And so, Lord, help me out now. No. Or this, I don't know you. I do not know you. In verse 12, we think about the closing sections of the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew 7:21. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who's in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name cast out many demons, and in your name perform many miracles? And then I will declare to them and say, depart from me, depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. Here in verse 12, depart, I never knew you. And then one more, 1 John 2, and by this we know that we have come to know him, if we keep his commandments. And the one who says, I've come to know him and doesn't keep his commandments is a liar, and the truth isn't in him. And so these ladies said, you know us, let us in. Hey, it's us. I know we're a little late, let us in. He said, if you love me, you keep my commandments. But instead, I don't know you. And so Jesus says, to end at verse 13, be on the alert then, for you don't know the day or the hour. Now, again, I kind of think this goes primarily to the final judgment. because Jesus has spoken in Matthew 24 of him, he himself not knowing the day or the hour of the destruction of Jerusalem. He expected you, when you saw the army surrounding the city, to understand the day was coming. But in this one, like at the end of Matthew 24, the faithful and wise servant, the faithful and wise steward, what did he do? Well, he was blessed because he was doing properly when his master comes. Again, Matthew 24:46. Blessed is the slave whom his master finds so doing when he comes. What is this parable about? These who are ready when their master comes. And so we have another illustration of the same thing. This really, Matthew 24 and 25, it's kind of interesting. I don't know of any other place where at such length Jesus teaches the same lesson 4 times. But once in the end of Matthew 24, and then 3 times in Matthew 25, Jesus teaches these parables and this story about reward and readiness. The only other time I can think off the top of my head of Jesus doing such repetitive teaching of the same basic point in so many different ways is Matthew 13, the great day of parables. And so it's really, and again, Matthew records that too. So it's really a unique thing that this much time is spent on this concept. But how important is this concept? The concept of, again, as stated in Matthew 24 and verse 44, for this reason you must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour when you don't think he will. So all of these things are explanations of that concept. And what do we still look forward to, even though we don't know when it'll be? The Son of Man coming at the hour we don't think that he will. So be ready. Be wise. Be like the 5 who were prepared. Now, I think one thing we would probably not take is a 50-50 split. Half the people will be ready for Jesus and half the people won't. That'd be a detail we probably not want to press, right? But just like he said in Matthew 24, one taken, another left. You don't know who's ready and you don't know who's not. But the only thing you can be absolutely sure of is whether you prepare yourself or not, because you can't prepare for somebody else.